Okay, everyone, I hope this is working okay. We're finally getting around to recording the trauma masterclass held in December. And really, this is because I know how hard it is, guys. I know how hard it is to go to therapy for, um, stuff that you kind of suspect that you've been needing to work on maybe for a long time. Maybe you're starting to realize that it's deeper um, in patterns and things you've been through that you don't know how to get at. And you're right. It's very hard to just go to therapy and talk about a thing, get it out, and go on your merry way. Um, what we're doing in therapy now is so different from just talk about it. So, um, and full disclosure, it's taken me about 20 years to get my stuff, kind of fully seen by my own self. And um, so I'm going to try and tell you about like the fragmented self and trauma. This is kind of what happens, but it's what happens even if you don't identify with holding trauma. And this is going to hopefully empower you become equal with the therapist in your journey, not always have that like shaky feeling when you come to therapy that you're just really not sure what the structure is here, what you're going to find out, if it's going to help. And so, what we're trying to just address here in the beginning slide is, understanding that trauma's imprint is both psychological and held in your body long after you've been through things, sometimes, very, very early childhood. Um, we continue to respond to life as if the danger were still present. So this is going to be an overview today, but I think it's going to help you a lot. And because this is psychoeducational, I'm just going to do a little meditation with you because, you know, a lot of times there's another place inside of us that can get activated, even if we're kind of like, nope, I'm going to learn stuff today. And so I just want you to feel safe inside yourself. Breathe in and know that stuff is there. That stuff has always been there. We're going to learn some stuff today. And if that stuff is there, the adult that you've been waiting for is here for you. And you're in a safe place. So just breathe in, exhale, and you'll see I have some text here. We all come to session with core wounds. They form thoughts when they're activated, like I'm not good enough, or no one's there for me, no one sees me, I don't matter, I'm too needy, I'm not safe. And we're just going to validate that that stuff is lying inside of us. Breathe in and exhale. Like I said, you're the adult they have wanted to be there. So we're going to tuck that stuff inside your present adult who's here to learn today, and breathe in for the count of 4. Exhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you're kind of like playing a little game with yourself. You're going to inhale for 5 and then exhale for 6. Exhale, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just kind of continue doing that with yourself, guys, playing a little game. Inhale for 7. Exhale, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just do like a nice smile to yourself. Down on little you, knowing that that part of you is safe inside this lesson today. So we're going to start with, where really a lot of the culture is at right now. We've come a long way. We kind of know this concept of triggers. And so I'm going to start here today. Um, what's the deal with triggers? And the idea of holding past inside us is increasingly popular. And we all do know a lot about being more sensitive. Words, tones, context, subjects, and the way we communicate can be intended one way, but may land another on the other person. And many of you have likely heard me say, like, how does that land with you, on you, in you? And now we're going to take the discussion to a place that differs from the mainstream. So I use trauma informed care. This means at any time I'm in my story as helping and you are in yours, I'm waltzing right into your story, whether intentional or not. It may feel that way. And I may come in with helping, but you may not feel the helping energy. And that's okay. We got to keep that awareness alive between us. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with you if therapy hasn't worked or other relationships haven't worked. Now, what I say is not responsible for affecting you because that happens in you. However, what I say will affect you. I'm here as a therapist to try and, give you that safe relationship, that safe place to practice. And it is safe to sometimes activate a person, but also let them know they're not bad for being activated. I'm not bad for activating you. We can hold space together. We are whole together, not just you and me. We're us in the space. When we can safely hold space that our stories are in us already, I'm open to your experience as valid and held with my own. We are tools for each other to see what's happening, but also what has happened for you in life here now, historically, or in the recent past. So again, this psychoeducational lesson today is about trauma and about how you can feel comfortable in a therapeutic relationship. The trigger is on the outside. It is less important than the common mainstream success. So that trigger, you triggered me. You could try and find all safe people, but it's really not a thing. You want to be aware of what happened and happens in you. That's our focus. So breaking down a trigger, the trigger on a gun, the heat to the boil, it overlooks that lying in the pot is something to boil, or lying in the gun is the unique ammunition ready to fire. So you are the still pot with the water in it. You are the still gun with the ammunition in it. And I know it's hard, things, people, situations do trigger us, but knowing what's lying there already is the key. Well, boundaries are an important part of healing. It's putting the cart before the horse. Unless we know the stories we hold in us, we don't really know what kind of boundaries to create. And we're not going to really want to be responsible for upholding those boundaries. So, for example, if I'm a helper and I don't recognize that I'm not going to help everybody, then I'm not going to put appropriate boundaries up to address self-care for me, certain working hours, checking emails at all points of the day. And I've gone through that, and I can get so pulled by wanting to be valuable as a helper that I forget that I need to be something without that value. And so I needed to learn that in order to be able to even understand what's in me that I'm trying to protect. The stories are not linear. However, they are not always explicit memories about our past that tell us what exactly happened to us in this life. I know many of my stories now, and I've put them in a linear narrative. That's really helped me want to protect this, but also in a way that is not so rigid boundaries, that it keeps like dangerous things, dangerous people out, because that just kicks up the idea of this unspoken trauma again that no one can see and no one understands. We want to understand it so that we can protect it, but also connect. Triggers then are an avenue in this new light for what is in us that did the following for protection: fight, flight, freeze, submit, fawn, fix, dissociate, attach, and many of these overlap. They're survival responses. Okay, so the neuroscience of trauma, and I'm going to try and be light with y'all on this. If the brain and the body are just inherently adaptive, then the legacy of trauma responses must also reflect an attempt at adaptation rather than pathology. So if your fight, flight, freeze, fawn Yeah, we know it might not be appropriate in the situation for connection or for functioning. However, it was made for survival. So the key is connecting that survival response with emotion regulation and interpersonal effectiveness. And we would get into that in therapy, but you want to understand that through a neurobiological lens, stuckness and resistance, untreatable diagnoses, or character disordered behavior, addictions, they just represent how an individual's mind and body adapted to the dangerous world in which the only protection was the very same caretaker who endangered him or her. Each symptom is an ingenious solution by the body to create some semblance of safety for the developing child, or even now, the endangered adult. So it's important to look at these reactions or symptoms, depression, substance abuse, eating disorders, as trying to say something about what the system feels is happening relationally. And, the thing with things that happen to us in life is we are so unique, unlike any other, animal on this planet, in that we are highly relational. And so that is more often where it shows up. You see an animal shake off a dangerous experience quite literally and be okay a couple minutes later and have no problem, really relating to the rest of the group if they were to go back. Not so for humans, because we need to make meaning, we need to feel safe. And that is such a different concept in the normal, like, animal experience. Okay, guys. So, again, a little bit more neuroscience of trauma light. Take a deep breath. Again, this is psychoeducational, made to help you feel like, yeah, it's not like you're just not figuring your life out. There's a lot of research and background information that could be really helpful for you to know. And this piece goes into how Bessel van der Kolk, in his trauma center research, he really kind of put on the map the idea that the body keeps a score. We began to see then that trauma related issues that affect our mental health and relationships, not as disorders or problems, with the events themselves, but as disorders of the body, brain, and nervous system being stuck in the past, what happened, without a way to tell the story and inform the present. So we're really seeing that, your brain can even, some people are lucky enough to know, like, yeah, I was really emotionally neglected growing up, but there's a body memory of that can't get out of that loop unless it really learns, like, what is that feeling when I feel really emotionally neglected, and how do I navigate through that, because I have no tools. I survived it when I was a kid, but I didn't thrive in it. We are biologically often splitting off from an effective way to move into a relationship, given that we are in half of our brain in survival mode. The trauma related issues with which individuals present for help, I now believe, are in truth like a red badge of courage that tell the story of what happened even more eloquently than the events each person consciously remembered. You will learn today about dissociative splitting, and I just spoke about that a little bit before, how the survival part of the brain really like needs to believe that it's all alone. And so it's not going to flip into the right side of the brain for problem solving, creative solutions, because it's so consumed by that survival piece of things that it has to do. You'll first get like a description of the theory of structural dissociation. We'll also talk about how to translate struggles using the language of parts and the language of animal defense survival responses, the cornerstone of structural dissociation theory. Again, just like take a breath, guys, and stretch. A lot of information here. The hope is this education will start to give a language to describe at long last what you already recognized but had no words to explain. So rather than feeling stigmatized or, crazier, the structural dissociation model hopes to be kind of like reassuring that if you haven't made progress, it's literally because, there's a survival response, and there may be also a very moving on with life, creative solution, problem parting self of you, but it's the lack of connection between the two that started when you were experiencing your relational traumas, usually in childhood, and that's where the wiring does occur. Its central principle is that splitting had simply allowed us to adapt in an unsafe world. So I'm just going to show you the brain here, and I think this helps a lot. You see the brain stem. If you're functioning out of the brain stem, it's all about, am I safe? And if you're lucky enough for it to move up to, am I loved? You get more information, but really to move all the way up to, what can I learn? If you have an unprocessed trauma, you are probably identifying, okay, I'm not safe. And in some way, you're saying, I'm not loved, I'm not cared for, I'm on my own. And we talked about that mental, chatter that's kind of there, and sometimes even becoming normal. And so, what can I learn can only happen really if you reprocess and you feel safe and you feel some type of connection. Now we know, we're not going to say like you fall in love with a therapist or in a therapeutic relationship, but you feeling cared for in trauma treatment is very important. And you can get that a little bit in therapy and then learn how to create some supports around you, even maybe from yourself, and taking care of yourself better, again, doing things you enjoy as you're working through. And I just give you a little bit of I want you guys to be able to revisit this later on your own. I'm just giving you a little breakdown of the brain structures in traumatic stress. And you can see, like, I think it helps people to know that this is really, really complicated. This whole process in your brain before it was even really developed to kind of handle a trauma. These core pieces of the brain were being utilized um, to process things. So you can see that, especially the hippocampus, the HPA axis, that initiates the stress response. And for a lot of us who hold trauma, this it should be like a negative feedback loop that tells the brain to stop producing cortisol. Well, it never quite happens. And so you are actually, in a continual place of dumping cortisol into your system, which can lead to kind of actually like a depression. And everybody is a little bit different in how that kind of shows up. And so I just give you a wider view here. And you'll notice I put a little note here as well in another part of the brain that goes up into the cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex. Um, if you are experiencing a survival response and trying to go into problem solving and it's not quite working, it can kind of create like a seesaw effect. And so that's why some of us are kind of sensing like, I am adult, I'm functioning, and I just, when I get activated, I like I said, have this like seesaw effect where I'm just like, why can't I push through this? Basic central nervous system stuff, brain and spinal cord, and then comes the um, autonomic nervous system. And again, guys, this is made for you to digest slowly and look back on. I want to show you how the sympathetic nervous system mobilizes fight and flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is for rest, digest. This is also where actually freeze can happen if the system is overwhelmed. So a lot of people think it's all about, survival response, but even in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is trying to kind of calm and ground and get back to regulation, if the parasympathetic nervous system is blocked, it can also activate a freeze response. And so I'm just showing you here how the divided parasympathetic nervous system can occur. So you see down the side where it says parasympathetic nervous system, contrary to popular belief, if you're not getting the rest and digest, bonding, and intimacy, you can go into an immobilization response to threat that is not so hot, which is faint response, collapse, dissociation, fatigue, depression. So, again, just validating that a lot can be going on as you process experiences. And it's not all about like figuring it out, talk about it, move on with life, get your act together. And people do that. But if you're spending most of majority of your life trying to get your act together, then all you have is an act. And we're talking about authentic healing here. So I have you take a break to here, but and that was part of the larger presentation when we were in group in December. But I'm gonna just power through that one and just give you a little bit of you know education on emotional flooding. This is when incoming sensory information is routed to the prefrontal cortex to allow for an accurate assessment of the situation. Up here in the what we call post-cognitive circuit, but obviously it doesn't get there. So in this precognitive circuit, the initiating of the warning system, there's no engaging the prefrontal cortex. It won't get up there, and an individual is just reacting without realizing why. Only that there's potential danger, and you have that kind of emotional hijacking where another part of your brain, the limbic system, suppresses regulating functions and suppresses that kind of balance between sympathetic, parasympathetic responses that could calm you down. So, again, I know this is a lot of information, guys, but I just want you to start to understand, and you can rewatch this later, how challenging um, it really was for you when you were experiencing and it may have not been just one thing. Every time you're left home alone past 6 o'clock and wondering if mom and dad are coming to work, like all sorts of things can be difficult life experiences, aside from just the glaring, verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual manipulation, or a violation. A lot of experiences where you feel abandoned, left, your needs were unmet, yourself was not validated, and you couldn't figure out who was there for you and cared about you, can all play a role. With trauma, or when triggered, we'll lose the ability to determine the difference between safe and dangerous, whether people or places are safe and or trustworthy or not, as the system becomes hyper vigilant to like facial expression, tone, um, movement, the whole gamut of things to be hyper vigilant about. And everything is seen as a threat neurobiologically, and we're without the prefrontal cortex, like I said. So you will get emotional flooding. You will get a sense that um, faces look angry and neutral faces even look aggressive. And we see this in couples therapy a lot as well, where it's like, how could you say that that tone is aggressive, says one partner to another? And how could you not understand how disrespectful that tone was, comes the other partner, and it just goes tit for tat. When we understand things neurobiologically, like I am registering your tone as a threat, it really doesn't matter rationally why. It is really good for the couple to validate, okay, that just happened, so what's going on here? Structural dissociation, and give you a little background on this now. The theory describes how the brain's innate physical structure and two separate specialized hemispheres facilitate like left brain, right brain disconnection when there's a threat. And I was talking to you about that before, capitalizing on the tendency of the left brain to remain positive, task oriented, and logical under stress. The disconnected left brain side of the personality stays focused on the tasks of daily living, while the other hemisphere fosters an implicit right brain self that remains in survival mode, brace for danger, ready to run, frozen in fear, even praying for rescue, or too ashamed to do anything but submit. In each individual, some parts are easier to identify with or own, and some parts are easier to ignore or dismiss as like not me. And now we're going to get into parts internally. The parts were also in conflict. Was it safer to freeze or fight, to cry for help, or to be seen and not heard? So even in the beginning, and we're going to move into internal family systems a little bit in this psychoeducation, we are getting divided inside of ourselves. The internal relationships between these fragmented aspects of self can also reflect the trauma environments for which they had been once solutions. For example, your environment says, don't be a wimp about it. And the left brain also tells and forces you not to cry in public or show weakness. And yet the right side needs an outlet and feels addicted or frantic, in need of relief with no other thing there, just like cut off. So what's happening in the brain can also be happening in the environment when we're getting feedback like, do not cry, do not cry. And yet your system is feeling the urge to need to. The left brain dominant present oriented self avoids the right brain dominant survival oriented parts or judges them as bad qualities to be modified. While the right brain implicit selves, like, just implicit there of the parts, are equally alienated from what they perceive as weak or absent. So, it's kind of interesting just from the very first experience neurobiologically, we're getting divided. The functioning of self carries on, trying desperately to be normal at the cost of feeling alienated from or alternatively invaded by the intrusive communications of the part. So it's like right brain, left brain. And again, there's no like facilitating factor to kind of help them be friends, and recognize. I mean, really literally think about that. Like your brain doesn't know it's a whole brain. You're having experiences, you're pushing through life, and the pattern starts very young, and all you're doing is reinforcing the divide. So no wonder why we can't see all the parts of ourselves in order to heal. The price of self alienation is a false self. So we may function sort of, um, or function better as a result of compartmentalization, but then suffer from feelings of not being authentic, not realizing that we all split to survive and that each side of the personality is equally real and necessary for us to exist. We easily misinterpret the intense, palpable feeling, memories of not me, child self, as triggered. These triggered reactions are pushed down as something that we shouldn't do. And we create like a moving on with life part, um, keeping on, even in the face of overwhelming pain. And we just continue to kind of reject and neglect these triggered parts of us. So I'm going to let you, kind of absorb that slide a little bit. There's a lot of information. The print is super small. I'm having trouble reading it myself. So hopefully you can zoom in on that. Internal conflicts between fragmented selves play out on the stage of life. Over time, self-alienation can only be maintained by most individuals at the cost of increasingly greater self-loathing, disconnection from emotion, addictive or self-destructive behavior, and internal struggles between vulnerability and control, love and hate, closeness and distance, shame and pride. While longing to be loved, safe, and welcome, many find themselves alternating between anxious clinging and pushing others away, hating themselves or having little patience with the flaws of others, yearning to be seen and yearning to be invisible. Years later, they present in therapy with symptoms of anxiety, chronic depression, chronic relationship problems, low self-esteem, stuckness in life, or diagnoses such as PTSD. bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, even dissociative disorders. But even if you've never been diagnosed, the pain is held. And these ways of developing roles of lawyer, therapist, mother, father, um, sometimes we attach to them strongly and, of course, fail at them daily. And it would really be this integrated self that could hold space for those experiences and not have them add also to pre-existing unprocessed trauma or difficult life experiences. There's a lot under the tip of the iceberg for all of us, guys. And when we're unaware that symptoms are being driven not just by difficult events, but by an internal attachment disorganization mirroring the more traumatic to their system attachment wounds that occurred earlier in life. Um, the more we think of these symptoms as bad instead of like actual like cries for help, but not so much help like fix me, but help communicate with me, figure me out. Trauma patterns can play out in therapy. So this is one of the main points of attending today, helping you feel as expert alongside me or your therapist, or just the idea of therapy, or finding, a healing relationship. Um, you're an expert at your story. You're not going to trauma bond with somebody, even a therapist, and have them understand it and be healed. That's not the way it works. You um, are an expert, and we can help you become an expert. I'm an expert listener and educator on trauma who has also lived experience from your side. We'll pack a powerful team approach. Trauma is often relational, therefore, starting with a bond of care, equal expertise, and non judgmental um, stances is just so key. What is happening in you, in our relationship, as we explore us, but also your story can help you in your relationships. You have learned above that the brain is helping and hurting us from getting really at the story. So when we hold space that it's not you, it's the way your brain rewired to hold this trauma and sometimes many difficult life experiences. The body, however, namely the vagus nerve information highway system that helps us get that information inside, what is happening with all your organs and nerves to the story too, may also seem like it's helping and hurting the ability to process. So even in therapy, we can kind of address tightness of chest or feeling like you don't want to have eye contact. These are again somatic gold mines of information that we can hold space for and listen to, notice, um, and really be non-judgmental. Things that are easy to talk about don't choke our breath or make us begin to get stomach pain or lose focus. Still, if we work together about symptoms from the information highway system, this vagus nerve system, they can speak and we don't wish them away or call them ill health or resistance. So I encourage you to bring like physical health into your sessions as well, because it's all for our understanding. The polyvagal theory and vagus nerve light. Um, so, I'm just going to kind of let you absorb this slide. Again, we're going through a lot of information, but I just want you to know this is why hugs feel so good. The vagus nerve um, is like really the parasympathetic um, innervation system right here. And it's really what can calm and ground you um, into paying attention to your story. So we have to be sensitive to the parts of it, the social nervous system part of it, the sympathetic nervous system part of it, and the parasympathetic nervous system part of it. And that's why our connection is really important in therapy, because we can co-regulate with trust. So if you can trust me when I say, let's just slow it down. I know you want to get everything out, but I think I'm feeling tightness in my chest if you aren't. And that's me using my, polyvagal system that's not connected as much to your trauma to kind of guide us. And so I would encourage you to kind of let that happen in therapy, or at least, revisit this live and go over it, do some research on your own. I know that I use humming and singing in my recovery. I got a cat, and just holding my cat has really helped me a lot, and just kind of like working on the tone of this area in safe ways for me that sometimes doesn't rely on another person at first. Now, using parts work is really important, and some of you already are familiar with this. I use it in session all the time, and this works with the structural dissociation model. The idea that, from day one, if you've experienced something difficult, you are cut off. The two parts that are getting through this, they don't know about each other. So how the body organizes to flee is distinctly different than how it fights or feigns death. Sensory motor psychotherapy. Again, I know it's like heavy information sometimes, but sensory motor psychotherapy, which, more than talk therapy, speaks the language of the body. And be still, then incorporate the language of the parts. Okay. So the sensory motor psychotherapy speaks the language of the body, but we need to use parts work coming from IFS, internal family systems, and structural dissociation to get at these idea that these parts of us are just holding all these stories, a wealth of information. And like I say down here, um, the internal family systems has a lot of value in our work together. You can read this slide in more detail, but it's creating breathing room for this other part that is key to self leadership and a less fragmented self experience. And we'll learn in internal family systems that there's usually very like vulnerable, exiled parts that are holding a lot of these difficult experiences that are beyond words. And then there's like a manager, kind of always wants you to push through, push through. And another part that may want to impulsively get you to push through. So, just to overview, we have the concept of triggering being valuable sources of information that tell us what happened and has been left unprocessed, possibly cannot be processed completely verbally. The brain being split to handle survival differently than getting on with it. It splits repeatedly to cope. This is normal. It's only with unprocessed trauma that it can act against a whole self because it can live divided quite well. And the body holds trauma in its reactions. The polyvagal theory explains how our body processes and holds implicit, kind of like, just like known felt trauma rather than explicit, which is like pictures, frames, verbal. And the last kind of point in the overview, using all of this with tools such as parts work or IFS, somatic experiencing, therapeutic holding space, etc., reintegrates the self. And that's kind of what we're looking for here. So, more on just how we become fragmented. Children need enough psychological distance from what's happening to avoid being overwhelmed and survive psychologically intact. Preserving some sense of self esteem, attachment to family, and hope for the future requires us to disconnect from what has happened. So, disconnect from those relational wounds, doubt or disremember their experience, and disown the bad victim child to whom it happens to as not me. Somehow we find a good way to be, and it's disconnected from how the child has been hurt. So that's where you guys are hearing lately, probably out there, childhood wounds, attachment trauma. Um, we have a way of just moving on with things even as children, and that's being somehow trying to get accepted and love. Sometimes it's a way of acting out to get even more of the negative feelings and responses to us, because in some ways we are kind of innately desperately afraid that it is the adults around us that are unsafe, so rather us be bad than they be bad. Splitting or fragmenting in this way is an ingenious and adaptive survival strategy, but one with a steep price. To ensure that the rejected, not me child is kept out of the way, out of consciousness, requires that long after the trauma events are over, individuals must continue to rely on dissociation, denial, and or self-hatred for enforcing the disconnection. Children survive the failure of safety, the neglect, the abandonment, the abuse, the betrayal, etc., at the cost of disowning their most vulnerable and most wounded selves, aware that their self preservation and ability to function is only one piece of who they really are. They hold a sense they are not really valid. This is just so important. And it's not what you can remember happened. If this feels right to you, trust that you're holding relational wounds. It may seem like your adult self has had it worse. The patterns usually lie deeper. You do not need to villainize family to look at this education as something that is happening for all of us on some level. We will be safer knowing this. You will recognize that you are the adult that you've been waiting for. Making a case for what happened, the good part of the child is free to develop normally, while that other part of the child bears the emotional and physical imprint of the past, scans for signs of danger, and braces for the next set of threats and abandonment. So a lot of people feel like, but I survived. And that's so very, very true. But again, if this is resonating with you, there's another part that is holding a lot of unprocessed trauma that needs organization, just like anything needs organization. Your home, a file cabinet to be more efficient, effective, and like present. Isn't your home more enjoyable when things are in order and it hasn't worn you out to do so? When we want to not wear you out, to organize your story and give you the psychoeducation so you have faith that, it's all here for you. You use your energy level on a daily basis to reprocess trauma as best you can, with this all here for you, and you can take your time. I'm just going to let you absorb um, this slide while I check in with myself and just rest my voice for a minute because I am getting hoarse and like Marge Simpson voice here. So again, just kind of repeating that traumatic memory, what can be recalled, um, can, kind of not be sequenced and can be quite alarming. That's why our system sometimes does such a good job to repress certain things. And again, this slide is just going to address, the just a very real fact that we don't get a clear and chronological record of what's really happened to us. We experience it, we move through it, but we do not process it in order, organized chronologically. There's a lot of tools on Enya, starting with the timeline, which is very helpful for this kind of thing. But again, we're using this psychoeducational to give you faith that you can reprocess and organize your trauma. And it's not always about, remembering every detail. And again, this slide is just indicating um, how much of a struggle it is to connect these patterns to the past. And, more often than not, we prefer not to think about it. It wasn't that bad. Trauma often leaves its legacy in ways that don't fit traditional diagnostic or treatment molds. Rather than finding relief in disclosing their secrets, clients feel ashamed and mistrustful, exposed. Instead of feeling better, they have trouble remembering or generalizing the new learning outside of therapy. This is why I'm telling you guys all the time, like, let's slow this down, let's slow this down. I know you want to get it all out, but you may get it all out. And when it still doesn't tell you anything about how to heal, it's like kind of all out there. And it can be hard to kind of, contain it and slow it back down and recognize, like, we're going to put these pieces together. Like, let's, you know, put that back almost in like a wait to be filed. In environments where the system now senses the threat of danger is ever present, it's more adaptive for both children and adults to be conditioned to maintain a readiness for potential danger in their body. So I'm just kind of validating here again the automatic patterns of responses that um, are connected to survival, not to reprocessing. For children, example, victims of domestic violence who endure day in, day out conditions of threat, or for whom feel seen and not heard in their safest adaptations, it's common to see parasympathetic, parasympathetic patterns of passivity, slowed thinking, and depression or shame dominating the individual's experience. So these responses can get very much stuck inside of us. In sympathetically dominant, we typically see hyperactivity, reactivity, feelings of anger or fear, or readiness to act first and think later, and mistrust or hypervigilance. Survival depends upon sympathetic highs and parasympathetic lows to drive animal defense responses. Nervous systems have been conditioned to dysregulate under stress. So recognize that nervous systems have been conditioned to dysregulate under stress. This is not about you being a mess up, not getting your act together. These things were hardwired into your experience for survival. It's time to use some tools to reorganize and recognize survival is just not moving. Thriving is not just like pushing through and moving on. So now we're going to go into the window of tolerance. And this is really important to recognize that, we all have a window of tolerance of like emotional intensity that we can experience. And um, at the upper and the lower, if you go over at the upper, it's more like hypervigilance. And at the lower, if you um, kind of breach that window of tolerance, it goes into hypovigilance, which is more like depression, freeze, shutting down. And it's really important to recognize that the therapeutic relationship and even things like the polyvagal theory can help you increase your window of tolerance, your sense of your body being able to handle what's happening to you, disconnection from actually pointing a finger at anything, and taking that pause to be inside yourself so that you don't use a kind of hypo shutdown or hypervigilance to cope, and you cope within your window of tolerance. When they are triggered later in childhood or as adults, when our nervous systems are already conditioned to activate the same autonomic responses and animal defenses that serve them as best as children, if that kind of window of tolerance was constantly being breached. So you can kind of like almost train yourself, or you do get trained to be outside of your window of tolerance. And if you think about it as a family life, the whole family can be outside of their window of tolerance, and that seem normal. So again, I'm going to let you guys absorb some of this information. Remember, this is me to watch several times on your own, and the body's instinct to prepare for the next threat while ensuring survival is inconsistent with the opportunity to recover from what has just happened, to feel a sense of it's over now, or to reset the nervous system to calm, resting state. So being outside of your window of tolerance as a child or even as an adult really inhibits the neurobiological raw data from processing. Everyone encodes uniquely, but one commonality is the memory is fragmented and unintegrated. not being understood, not being heard, no one getting it. These become powerful triggers. We don't want that in therapy or in your relationships, to be honest. We want to teach parts language. We want to understand these theories so that you feel really capable. I mean, it's not that it's easy, but things are occurring in the session and in your relationships inside your window of tolerance. And it's just rare instances where you're outside your window of tolerance. I think, guys, I'm going to cap it here. I know there's a few slides left, and I'm just going to try and power through them quickly. And I'm doing this because, in all honesty, I do have several sessions today to get to, and I'm running out of a little bit of time. So I'm going to cruise through these last couple of slides and just let you read them. And you can also slow this down on your own. I give you a case example here. This is Elizabeth, and she was, really sped up about finishing her semester and finishing a paper. And we really had her slow it down and do some parts work with this foggy brain symptom that she was having. And we realized that, foggy brain was just telling her, like, it can't be written. Like, we figured out that it should be dictated, and she can dictate using, Microsoft Word. And it was so much easier to get it done. So instead of shaming her foggy brain, we kind of held space for it. And again, I apologize for being a busy therapist and needing to kind of power through the last pieces of this. Hopefully, you can kind of just read through everything. This is the quick parts overview. It talks about exiled, managers, and firefighters. Managers being the ones that keep that person going. So, really, the work of therapy is about noticing what the managers are doing and identifying those exiles and even the impulsivity of the firefighters. So, firefighters kind of step in to just like power through things really quick, maybe go out and have a cigarette to calm down, or um, sometimes people struggle with more severe addictions like eating disorder. And this is just a diagram of the parts. Yeah, we are getting it in under an hour. So maybe it's a good thing that I was in a rush because we're going to get this in under an hour. And this is just, kind of what we do in session to ask parts. So some of you may find this really familiar. And if you're a therapist and you're watching this, it'll kind of encourage you to be able to do the work. And this just kind of shows you how the trauma part of the personality can have like all these reactions and does actually. And this is what it looks like to hold trauma. And this is um, normal until we reprocess. Okay, we did it. Woo! Very good. All right. Thanks so much, guys. And I will post this probably on Enya and LinkedIn, but it will be connected to YouTube. So hopefully that'll make it accessible to everyone. Thanks, everybody.